Have you heard about pyscript? This is a new project from Anaconda that builds on top of this project called pyodide that allows us to write front-end code in Python rather than JavaScript. Now, there have been projects like this before, but this one is special. It doesn't adapt some JavaScript runtime to act like CPython. It actually takes the CPython runtime and compiles it to WebAssembly. So what runs there is running very, very close to what you would get with regular Python. It's super exciting, and I'm going to show you how to build real web applications that don't suffer from many of the performance issues or the load time problems that people tell you you will run into when using these types of runtimes. You're going to be pretty impressed with this, I think. I know that I am. Let's dive into it. So first, let's start by just thinking about pyscript real quickly. If you go to pyscript.net, you can see they have a very brief introduction page talking about all the cool features that you have. For example, you have Python in your browser. You have the entire Python ecosystem. So many of the popular packages like NumPy and Pandas and so on. Bidirectional interaction with JavaScript. So it's not like you just hand your code off to the Python runtime and something happens. Like you can interact with, say, the DOM, very, very important. You can add new dependencies, kind of like you would with pip in Python, and so on. All right, so there's a lot of cool stuff. There's talk about a visual application platform. It's not really as impressive as it sounds. What is impressive is what we can build with it. Let me show you. So look over here. See this in my doc? First of all, an application in my doc that is a Python application. I'm going to click this. It's built with pyscript. Watch what happens. It takes just a moment to load, and check it out. We have some kind of weather report. That weather report was gotten by calling an API, exchanging some JSON, and then figuring out how to render that in the DOM. It has this cool little button. We can refresh it. So once it's up and running, notice it started quite quickly within about 2 seconds from cold start. Let me hit refresh. Look at this. Now the weather's changed. Hint, it's just random weather. Don't really worry about what it says. But as we click around, you can see if I go click, 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 it's instant. It's instantaneous how this app works. This is all Python, and every click is going over to a web service, getting some report for some weather, figuring out what to do with the screen, and rendering it. All right, this is what I'm going to show you how to build using pyscript during this video. Now that you've seen how amazing it can be, let's go back and look at the slightly less amazing bit. So what's not directly linkable through here is if you go to pyscript.net/examples, there's actually this examples page where you can run a bunch of the examples. So for example, I could come over here and show how I use the pyscript tag instead of just /script or angle bracket script. And let's open this up. And what does it say? Notice it's loading up some stuff. And then the current date computed by Python is whatever it is. Let's pick something else over here. We're going to go and we can do some stuff with matplotlib. Let's open that. So look, it's loading, 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 loading. That's full gigabit internet speed, by the way. That's not slow internet. I'll show you the slow internet in a second. But look, here we got something rendered on the client side by Python and matplotlib. We can do a few more things that are kind of fun. This WebGL, it's pretty interactive. So over here, as I move my mouse around, you can see we've got this cool 3D interaction thing using accelerated WebGL graphics in Python. Pretty epic. Okay, so those are all great. One of the problems you might run into here, though, like let's go to this matplotlib one here, and if we pull up our dev tools and we go to network, and we go and say we want to maybe just do fast 3G and we don't do any caching. How's this going to work here? Let's see. It's loading. It's loading. Oh, now it's loading the runtime. It's loading. Now it's loading the WebAssembly executable of the runtime. Woo! Woo-wee! That's pretty big. Now, there are certain things you can do with caching and so on to make this better. But just to give you a sense, like, this is not ideal, right? But remember what we got when I clicked this. Bam. Up and running right away. Now, it doesn't matter it doesn't matter how slow the internet is. When I installed this application, it maybe was really slow, like you might see below, although actually it was a lot faster. But once it's installed, it doesn't matter if you're on a 3G network or whatever. All right, this is almost done, I guess. You can see it's downloaded a bunch more things like matplotlib and so on. But it will finish. Let's not watch it. Okay, so here's the takeaway. Pyscript is amazing. It lets us put Python code directly in the browser and interact with the third-party libraries. It's a little bit heavyweight in order to do that. So how do we deal with this problem? The other one I want to point out over here is if you look through all these examples, here's a cool map interactive demo. Here's working with a panel. Here's a streaming graph type of thing. Here's an interactive plot. Here's more plots, some more plots, and then more plotting, and then a REPL. Where is the regular web application? Where's like, here is my Vue framework or my React framework that I can just do in Python with Python classes instead of JavaScript classes and so on. Missing. So what I'm also going to see in this example that we're going to build is something that's much closer to a regular application. Right? This thing looks much more like an app that you would expect to use as a web user, not a data scientist. Okay. All this stuff over here is very data science focused, but there's some cool possibilities to do just regular Python. Now, all of this code is over here on GitHub, github.com/MikeCKennedy/pyscript-pwa-example. So if you want to play around with this, nothing's hidden. It's all right here, and this is completely self-contained. It's pretty large because I've embedded some of those binaries, but I wanted it to be totally standalone. Now, I've already cloned that over here, and it's completely the way it is, comes from GitHub. So let's go ahead and quick set it up. It's on the server side for the APIs and stuff like that. It's a Flask application, so we need to do a few things to create our Python virtual environment. So namely Python -m -v. We need to activate it. And then we need to install the requirements, which is just Flask and its dependencies. And we should be all set up and good to go. So let's open this up in PyCharm. So we just get the project's README and stuff like that. But once it finishes parsing everything, we'll be able to run it. Let's just make sure we can run this. And now it says it's going to run this as a file, which is not what we want. So let's remove that, add a Flask run configuration, say module is app, and debug is good to go. So now we should be able to just click this, and it looks like it starts up great. Let's click here and see what happens. That should look familiar. That should look very familiar, because here is our web application that we actually installed down here as a progressive web app, an offline progressive web app. Cool. So how did we do this? What is going on here? First, let's see how we got the Python code integrated into our application, and then we can talk a bit about the progressive web app. These are two different choices or two different levels of running this code. So we don't really need to worry about how they interplay so much. You could just do the web app with decent caching and be good to go from there. All right, so how do we do this pyscript stuff? Well, let's go over here to this index, and it looks like regular Jinja code from Flask, or mostly just basic HTML, until you get down to here. We have this configuration section. By default, what you will get is the pyodide runtime. This is the underlying Python WebAssembly will be loaded out of some CDN or some website far away, and I don't even think it has great caching. So if you want to take control over this like we did and serve it up out of where? Out of your offline progressive web application, or just your own cache, we put pyodide all down in here with all of its details. So we can say, look, the runtime is this local version of Python based on pyodide. So we have this cool pyconfig, and then much like you saw me go over here and set up this virtual environment by running our requirements, we have this environment that we can set. So I can say things like, I want to use matplotlib, as well as I want to include Python code that I write. We don't really care about matplotlib, so we're not using that. But these are the client-side Python files that we will be able to import or interlink even, like the client uses the weather API code. That's the code that we'll be able to work with, but you've got to express that here. And then everything that follows is plain HTML. There's nothing about Python down here. And that's important because this is how you write regular web applications. You have things like IDs and containment, like the weather thing contains an image, or the image container contains the weather image, and so on. So like when you saw the sun or you saw the rain, that's what was being set there. The temperature is being set here, and the forecast text is being set there. Remember, this is what it looks like. Oh, looks like our weather app is offline. Got to run the app before this works again. I hit the stop for some reason. Okay, so this is all we do on our HTML side to work with this. Now, of course, you could actually, just like you could with JavaScript, you could write script and you could go crazy and write your entire application here. That's not how you should do it, is it? No. What you should be doing is you should actually create other files where you isolate your code. For example, your UI code and interactive code and your API calling code and so on. So that's what we're doing here. That's why you don't see very much Python. We go down, the last bit is to say our application startup is this pyscript where the source is to go and run the client.py. This little bit here has to do with the progressive web app, so don't worry about that. So this is it. We set up our environment, we configure the runtime, we set up our environment, basically think virtual environment there, and then we set the start script for our page. It will have access to the entire DOM, just like regular JavaScript would. Now, let's get over to the really amazing part. Check this out. In our static section, we have CSS and images and JavaScript and the two runtimes that I've downloaded for this, pyscript, which then depends upon pyodide. But check this out. This is not something you normally see. You normally see JS, not Python. So let's see how this code works. So let's start with the weather API. Remember, what's happening here is when let me go ahead and run this again. When we click here, that button or upon load, this is going over to an API. If we go to the network tab, we can put it back to normal. When I click this, you can see it's hitting, where's our request? It's hitting weather/data and getting a response of some JSON. Okay. All that is happening on the client side in Python, and that is in this file right here. Now just take a moment and let's look at this code and see how it feels compared to, say, normal Python. So down here, we've got our imports, and then we've got a class. This is the class that is given back from this API when a weather report is created. And it's just a regular Python class. It has a constructor, it takes a dictionary, and out of the dictionary, this is the dictionary we got from the API response that we just saw in the dev tools. We get the report, that's the summary. We get the sky, like is it sunny, cloudy, and so on. And we get the temperature, and it should be coming over actually as an integer. Think of that. Client-side programming in the web with integers. JavaScript doesn't have integers. But just to make sure in case, we're going to parse it over to an integer. And then this gets interesting. We're going to download a report, type hints already in our code here if you want them. We're going to get a string IO from the IO module. And we can't use requests here. They're working on some of the support. Not every library can be used on the client side. So instead we have pyodide.openURL. And what you get back is text. And then we just use the JSON to load it from the text into a dictionary. We pass that to this class, it parses it apart, and we hand it back to whoever wanted to get that weather report. This is running on the client side every time up at start, and then every time I click that, this is the code that's running right there. How awesome is that? Okay. Back on the client. When the app starts up, let's see down at the bottom, I guess we can go from there. At the beginning, it says we're going to try to run this main method. You know, the dunder, if dunder name equal dunder main. We're not doing that here. We just say if, at the very bottom, we just try to run the startup, okay? And if there's something that goes wrong, we'll put out a message here. But what we're going to do is we're going to set the weather and then hook into that refresh event. That means hook this click right there, that JavaScript event. When we set the weather, look at this. This is pretty standard JavaScript type programming. If you're not using something like Vue or React, we're just going to say, give me some things by ID, image, temp, and weather. Add the class hidden to the weather so you don't see it like jerk around as we're making these changes. I'm going to remove the old styles that we may have set to it, like whether it's rainy or sunny. So for example, see the background is gray when it's rainy, more gray when it's cloudy. And then if you wait for some sun, it's nice and blue, right? Like that kind of stuff is being cleaned up. Do it. Cool. Try except. Remember when I accidentally ran it when it was offline and it said, whoa, it's offline. This exception happened here and we created this offline story. Pretty awesome. And here we're just calling weather API download report. That's the API we spoke about at the beginning of this Python section. And notice up here, we are saying import weather API. This thing is importing that thing. How sweet is that? Okay, so now we get our report and then we just add the body of whether it's rain or sun or whatever. We set the inner text of report to be, is it, clear and beautiful skies today, something like that. We set the inner text of the temperature. So to add it to a string and so on, we want to stringify it. So we just do stir of the number. And then we set the attribute source to the image to whatever the thing is, right? The images over here are like cloudy, rain, sun, and so on. And then we just show that section. How cool. Look at this. This is all Python. This is Python code here, and it's running on the front end in the C Python runtime based on the pyodide WebAssembly runtime. Not getting tired of saying that. So over here, we can say create an error, or we can clear out the body, which remove the classes we may have set. Here's an interesting one as well. How do we hook that refresh event? Normally, this is a JavaScript on click event. How do we do that in Python? Up here we can say from JS import things like set interval and document and so on. And down here we create an inner function called event, and it has a parameter E. You've probably seen this from JavaScript, and we call set weather, right? That does the download. And if that's passed in, we call prevent default and return false to make sure that it doesn't try to do any navigation or other weird stuff that you might do if that was like a linkable type thing or a clickable type thing. So that's the event handler. And then we just go and find the refresh link. And we say onClick equals this Python function. That's it. We do that once at startup. And then we got this. So already what we have is a really fantastic application that if I close this, and then I open it again, let's see, it starts quite quickly. So let's give it a shot here. There we go. You don't see that really slow loading, downloading, loading thing that you saw from the examples. No, it's really quite quick. Got this really nice web app that runs in the browser based on pyodide. We've configured it all here and we tell it to run here. We don't navigate away from this page once it starts. It's really meant to be a single page application, or things get kind of wonky a little bit on the refresh. We write standard Python to talk with our APIs. We write non-standard, semi-standard Python to do like the DOM manipulation and so on. But it's the Python friendly version of the JavaScript APIs, as you can imagine. So I hope that's got you really excited about pyscript. We still have one more thing to do though. we want to have this as an application in our dock that really goes fast and works offline. For that, we need to take the web app that we've created and convert it to a progressive web app using standard HTML and JavaScript. So if you're familiar with progressive web apps, what you do here is exactly the same thing. You just have to specify the Python runtime as some of your offline files to cache. Let's jump back in and see what we'd have to do to turn this into the progressive web app that it is. Now, as we get into the progressive web app here, let's start from scratch. So I'm going to go over here and hit these three dots and say uninstall this app. Yes, get rid of it. Oh. What I needed to do was delete some stuff as well. Let's go over here and we can refresh this. If I right click, notice all of a sudden we now have install PWA weather. So this is Vivaldi, and the way you get this is you right click on the tab. It's not discoverable. It's unfortunate. If you go to the same place in Brave, you get a different experience. Notice this little install thing popped out for a second and went back. I can click that here and install it with Brave. But we'll go ahead and do it here. Chrome also works. By the way, Firefox, Mozilla gave up on the idea of progressive web apps in Firefox, so it's impossible to do this. Can't do it in Firefox. Sorry, really wish that wasn't the case, but c'est la vie. Okay, so it says, do you want to install this in an app? It's been a great website. What about an app? Let's install it. And there it is. Again, we can, pen this in our dock and come over here, keep in dock or pin to your taskbar. Here's this app and so on. We close this and double click it. It comes back just like that. Clear and beautiful skies today in our Pythonic world. I love it. So that's how we can install it. How did I make that happen? Let's review real quick the progressive web app side of things. So in order to do this, and be clear, I want to say I'm not an expert at progressive web apps. I learned just enough to sort of get these things working, and I'd really like to do more. But there's a few things that you have to do. You have to have what's called a service worker who is in charge of mediating between offline and online data. You need to have something called a manifest that describes what files get downloaded and cached offline, how your app looks, for example, like these icons right there, and so on. So let's go to the top. Here we have our manifest to static/manifest/JSON. And if we go over there, close these off, you can see this is incredibly simple. It's just a JSON file with a name, pypwa weather. If we hover over it, see this pypwa weather right there. That's what that is. Same for the short name. The start URL is when it launches in offline mode, or even, I guess if it were online, when it launches the app, what is the URL it's going to load? We just want it to load the home page. We're just here at /, so that's what we want it to load. Is it going to be a full screen app? Is it going to be a standalone desktop app looking thing with no browser stuff around it? What's it going to look like? I think this is probably what most people want. Theme color. That's see the gray bar up here behind the PWA weather in white. This part up here that contains this section. That is this. This is like a loading color, orientation, and so on. And then here's all the icons and the sizes. So if you install it onto like an iPhone, how does it look on the home page and stuff like that? So that's our manifest file. You have to have one of these, but you can see it's incredibly simple. The other thing that we have to do is have this service worker. So if you come back over here, we go down to the bottom, you can see this PWA scaffold. And what that does is that installs this service worker. It's not itself the service worker, but a thing that registers it. So let's go over here. It says if this browser supports this idea of these service workers, then we're going to wait for it to load. And when it does, we're going to register it right here, the service worker, and either report that it worked or say there was an error. Now, this is really important. And notice how the service worker is being served out of /. If you serve it out of a subdirectory, it can only work with files and stuff contained within that subdirectory. For example, if you're trying to cache files or do other things, it can't get outside if it was in like worker / like this. So you're best off making it at the top level. In order to do that, Flask doesn't like to do that. I had to add a route that would sort of just send that text back. You can see that in the app.py. Here's the service worker. We gave it a cache name. So I'll show you that in just a second. We give it a cache name. There's not an error. It just thinks it's misspelled. And then these are our assets, which we might cache. So we want our CSS and our JavaScript available offline. Here's where our Python code is available offline. Here's where pyscript, the runtime, is available offline. Here's where pyodide and all those large, remember you saw it downloading. That was that stuff right there, along with the wheels and so on. These are Python wheels. So this allows us to have pyodide offline. And then these are just our images, right? So when we're here and we see our sun, we want to have the sun available offline as well. So this is how we get it to run super fast, to run locally without all the drawbacks, right? We already have it guaranteed to be offline upon install for both pyscript and then the supporting pyodide. And then, very importantly, we can go over here and just say, we're going to use our own local cacheable version. So we have complete control over that. Okay, and that's it. The other thing we have to do is basically when the app gets installed to do a bunch of crazy stuff to cache into all these files I described above. And then when there's a request for one of them, first try to get it out of the cache. So if you can get it out of the cache, great. Otherwise, go to the internet. If it's something that we don't have a thing for, like weather API calls, just go to the internet. So that's pretty much it. Once you do all those things and if you surface it right, you now have an application you can install, just like this one down here, that works in an offline mode. So super cool. Let's refresh a few things. Yeah, feels pretty good, doesn't it? That doesn't feel like a crummy app you wouldn't want to run at all, does it? Nope. Clear and beautiful blue skies. So this is our app. One final thing. Let me pull up the dev tools here inside of the app, and notice there's an application section. Here you can see the manifest, which has the PWA weather. It's got where it came from and its start URL. This is all the stuff that you saw us enter. Here's the icons and so on. Okay, the service worker. Notice this thing gets cached. You might want to check update or reload and update, and like it's kind of hard to get it to refresh if you make changes as you're developing it. So beware of that. So that's all good. And then down in the cache section here, notice this is our dev PyPA weather cache that we have. And notice we have all the things like, for example, we have the pyodide 5 megs of basically standard library. And then we have the WebAssembly runtime, which is 10 megs. And look, some other things like here, the pyscript CSS is pretty large. The pyscript JS is a meg and so on. But that's fine because once we install it, it's super, super fast, right? Let's just do a quick sort of wrap up here and close this out. Say, all right, it's gone. What is the user experience again? Click this. Magic. That's what it is. It is so good. That to me feels like a totally reasonable desktop application. Now, before you get too excited, I do want to put one word of caution out there. If you go down right here, it says, please be advised, pyscript is very alpha and under heavy development. There are many known issues from usability and load times. I will add instability. There is certainly the chance that when I'm running this, like, let me see if I can get an error to happen. If I hit refresh, there. What happened? Not really sure. I'm not super psyched about that. It doesn't look like it worked. Let me do a select all, copy. Can't see anything, can you? But below this gray bar that I can never get to, if I go here and I do this, it says this weather API was not found. What do you mean it wasn't found? We didn't change the code. If I refresh it, it's found again. Why? I don't know. I have no idea why. Because it's just not finished and it's not ready for production application. So play with it, check out some things, keep an eye on it. There's some really strong possibilities of amazing Python apps that we can install, not just on desktop, but even on things like iOS, because that supports progressive web apps. So this is super, super exciting, but do be a little bit careful about depending too strongly on it right away. It's in super alpha. They're making lots of changes. So maybe even what you've seen in this video is not completely valid by the time you're watching it. But it's incredibly exciting to be able to write apps that look like this, that are Python based, that behave like desktop apps and look beautiful. So thank you to Fabio and the team over for pyscript and the whole pyodide team for getting us this far. And I know this is only the beginning. I'm sure we'll see things like Vue.js and React front ends wrapping up some Python code, or more the other way around. So we can write Python code that will then do front end web framework things and make this experience even better. But so far, it's still pretty cool where we've gotten. All right. Well, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Consider subscribing. It honestly really, really helps this channel. It helps me create more things here for you like this. So thanks for coming. Thanks for making it to the end. Enjoy.